Hey everybody, one thing I've noticed is some of you guys are having trouble multiplying whole numbers by fractions and multiplying fractions by fractions. So in this video I'm going to go over how to do both and then give us a comparison. So first let's start with 5 times 2/3. We have a whole number times a fraction. I'm going to show this first using an area model. So if I show this using an area model, I'm going to start by drawing one whole by one whole. Okay, so this area model has one whole by one whole. So I'm going to ask myself, all right, here's my first factor, 5. How can I represent 5 on my area model? Well, I want to represent 5 as this side. To represent 5 as this side, right now I only have 1. So how many more of these squares would I need to represent 5? Yeah, I would need 4 more squares. So I'm going to draw 1, 2, 3, 4 more squares. Okay, so now this side doesn't represent 1. This side represents 5. All right. Now I want this side over here, I'm going to change colors. I want this side over here to represent 2/3. So right now this side represents 1. Am I going to need to add squares or am I going to need to cut this square to represent 2/3? Yeah, 2/3 is less than 1, so I'm going to need to make this side less than 1. So to do that, I'm going to cut this side into thirds. And I'm going to extend this side into thirds. So I'm cutting all the squares into thirds. And I'm going to shade in 2 of them because I need 2/3. So I'm shading in 2/3. All right. So now I want to see what the product is. Pen, there we go. So 5 times 2/3. Let's see, each of my wholes are in thirds. So I know my denominator is 3 because each of my 1 wholes is split into 3 parts. Now let's see how many thirds we have shaded. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 thirds are shaded. Okay, so my product of 5 and 2/3 is 10 thirds. Now let's take a look at an example where we're multiplying fractions by fractions. All right, I'm going to start out the same way. I'm going to switch colors. I'm going to start out by drawing my 1 by 1 square. So this is a square with side length 1. Ooh, that is an ugly bracket. With side length 1 and side length 1. First, I'm going to ask, how can I represent 1/5 on this square? I want this side to represent 1/5. Do I need to add more squares? No. 1/5 is less than 1, so I'm okay with the square I have. To represent 1/5, I'm going to cut this side into fifths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are my fifths. Next, I'm going to shade in 1 of my fifths. Okay. All right. Next, I want to see where can I represent 2/3? I want this side over here to represent 2/3. Am I going to add additional boxes? No, because 2/3 is less than 1, So I'm okay with this one whole I already have. I need to make this one whole smaller. So I'm going to take my one whole and I'm going to cut it into 3 pieces. So this side right now is one whole. I want to cut it into 3 pieces, into thirds. Ooh, that is ugly. Let's try that again. 1, 2, 3. 3 pieces. Now I need 2 of my thirds. So I'm going to shade in 2 of my thirds. That's unfortunate that it doesn't show the overlap as well as I hoped. All right. So I have 1/5 times 2/3. When I multiplied 1/5 times 2/3, this area where there's kind of an overlap, that is my product, and the total number of squares that make up one whole is my denominator. So let's see now how many pieces make up our one whole. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 pieces that make up one whole. So my denominator is 15. Of those 15 pieces, how many pieces are part of our overlap of 1/5 and 2/3? There are 2 pieces. 1, 2. So there are 2 15ths that are part of the overlap of 1/5 and 2/3. So the product is 2 15ths. Now, one thing you might notice is that here our denominator changed, but here our denominator stayed as 3. And I want you to think about why that is. When we multiplied 1/5 times 2/3, the number of pieces that made up one whole changed. It changed to 15. But when we multiplied 5 times 2/3, the number of pieces that made up one whole was still 3. So the denominator still stays at 3. Okay, so now let's compare multiplying a fraction by a fraction and multiplying a whole number by a fraction. We'll start, we will start with our fraction times the whole number. Or I'm sorry, our fraction times the fraction. So I'm going to start by drawing my one whole by one whole. I'm going to represent 1/3 on this side by cutting this side into thirds. I just need 1/3, so I'm going to shade in 1/3. Okay. Now I'm going to have this side represent 2/5. Right now this side represents one whole, so I'm going to cut my one whole into fifths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I need 2 of my fifths, so I'm going to shade in 2/5. All right, so now I'm going to ask myself, how many pieces make up one whole? Making up one whole is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 pieces. So my denominator is 15. Now I'm going to ask myself, how many pieces are in the overlap area? There are 2 pieces in the overlap area, so my numerator is 2. So 2 of my 15ths are in that overlap area, so the product of 1/3 and 2/5 is 2/15. Now let's see what happens when we multiply 3 times 2/5. I'm going to again start out by drawing my 1 by 1 square. All right, I want this side of my square to represent my first factor 3. Do I have enough squares to represent 3? How many more squares would I need? I would need 2 more squares to equal 3. So I'm going to draw in 2 more squares. 1, 2. Okay, so now this side represents 3 holes. Okay. And I need all 3 of my holes, so I'm going to shade in 3 holes. All right. Now my other side, 2/5. Do I need more squares to make 2/5? No, I don't, because this is 1 hole already, and 1 hole is more than 2/5. So I actually need to make this into less. So I'm going to cut my 1 hole into 5ths. I'm going to do that with the black. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so now I have that cut into 5ths, and I need 2 of the 5ths. So I'm going to shade in 2/5. All right, so now I'm going to ask myself, what is my denominator? How many pieces make up 1 whole? Now you might think 15 pieces make up 1 whole, but if you thought that, that is actually not correct. 15 pieces make up 3 holes. This is not 1 hole, this is 3 holes. So I just need to look at 1 hole. And making up 1 hole is 5 pieces. Now I'm going to ask myself, how many of these 5ths are in my overlap area? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 5ths in my overlap area. So my product of 3 and 2/5 is 6/5. Notice how when I multiplied a fraction by a fraction, my denominator changed, but when I multiplied a fraction by a whole number, my denominator stayed the same. I want you to think about why that is. So assuming you've had time to think about why that is, let's talk about it. Here, the number of pieces that made up 1 whole changed to 15, so my denominator is 15. Here, the number of pieces that made up 1 whole stayed at 5. It did not change, so my denominator did not change. All right, I hope that video was helpful. Have a good day.